Hey, Crystal Maiden here. This is part 23 of Twilight Princess. And this is Arbiter's Grounds, and I was not expecting a sand dungeon to be one of the best dungeons in the game. It does have a few unintuitive parts, though. Like, I vividly remember one part where I got stuck for a long time on my previous playthrough of the game because I didn't know that I was supposed to look up, and that's how I was supposed to progress. But other than that, it's actually a pretty well-designed dungeon. Like, this is the first dungeon in the game where it isn't a kind of dungeon where it only gets fun after you get the dungeon item. This dungeon is still pretty fine to play, even before you get the dungeon item. That's probably because of the fact that it's a dungeon that most makes use of the fact that you can turn into a wolf. Aside from, I guess, the next one coming up. They're both roughly equal, I guess. But yeah, like, there's lots of advantages to turning into a wolf in this dungeon. Like, you can run around the quicksand so much faster. Like, Link, as a human, moves so slowly in the quicksand. Okay, shouldn't this make you sink in it right away? Because you transform into it, and so wouldn't you just bend down into it and then sink into it? I don't know. But yeah, just by constantly pressing the attack button, you can jump across the quicksand just fine. You don't have to worry about sinking in it too much. This confused me at first because this was literally the first time that you were ever expected to know that apparently you can claw shot this thing. How are you supposed to know that? I only figured that out because I decided just to try it. It's like, throughout the game, there's only one thing that you can claw shot, and that's the yellow things. Well, and rupees, of course, but it's not like you can claw shot to... You can't claw shot yourself into them. Like, it's more limited than... Like, in Ocarina of Time, you could use the hook shot to bring yourself to chests. In this game, you can't do that. I guess the claw shot would be too broken then? I don't know. And unfortunately, this is a room where you have to make use of the terrible lantern with its terribly reaching light. Even with the light on, I still can't see where I am. I can't light up the entire room with the lantern, which means I can't see where all the enemies are that I need to beat to exit the dungeon, to exit the room. Not to mention, there's no way to upgrade your pathetically tiny lantern oil meter. Like, you're just wandering around aimlessly because you have no idea where the enemies are. It creates such a tiny circle of light around you, and it just doesn't work. And the lighting on Link is so dark. Like, he looked like Dark Link there. He looked completely black. I assume they fixed the lighting for the HD version? Like, he looked black again. Like, he looked completely black. Like, the lighting, even though Link is literally carrying a light source right in front of him, you'd think that would light him up, but apparently not. Oh well. It's just weird because you expect lighting to be realistic in a realistic art style. In a cartoony art style, you don't care where the shadows are that much. You don't really think about it. Glares at Wind Waker HD. Of course, this is obviously a reference to an Ocarina of Time where the exact same thing happened. Only you had to use an empty bottle to put the Po Fire in. And in this game, you're not really collecting Po Fire, you're just defeating Poes themselves as a wolf. Because you can only defeat them as a wolf for some reason. In the previous games, you could fight Poes just fine without being a wolf. All you had to do is shine light on them for enough. But here, I guess they got genres happy and decided not to put light anywhere. But the thing is, you can't see them at all unless you're a wolf. And you could see them just fine when you weren't a wolf in other games, so it just feels like an arbitrary sudden limitation. Another thing arbitrary is that you can only attack them when they're shining white. And they'll start shining so suddenly for such a tiny amount of time that it doesn't entirely feel like a fair challenge. Like, you're constantly jump attacking at them over and over again. And then they either attack you or you miss your opportunity to attack them. Fighting these poses is just not fun at all. The smaller ones that you usually see, they can hover so high above the ground if they decide to. And then it can get annoying trying to attack them. As even if you target them with your midnight charge attack, it can still be difficult for you. Not to mention the fact that Poes are only around at night. Obviously that's not a problem for this dungeon. Well, it would really suck if it was. Although I feel like you always get to this dungeon at night. And does time not pass in dungeons? But yeah. You basically have to follow a scent trail in order to get to each Poe. And when you defeat a Poe, the scent trail ends with it. So it's not like you defeat Poe and are immediately made it very obvious where exactly you're supposed to go next. The scent trail just sort of ends, and then you have to wander around aimlessly trying to figure out where the next one is. This is... I don't really like the pushing stuff to rise a floor concept. These elevators are inherently clunky and unintuitive because how are you supposed to know which side of it you push at to make it go up and which side you push at it to make it go down? It's very unintuitive, and you're generally going to end up pushing it in the wrong direction and rising the floor when you don't want to, or decreasing the floor when you don't want to. And this, again, this is a part that got me stuck on this dungeon for a long time when I last played the game, because how are you supposed to know to look up there? I mean, I guess the scent trail leads up to it, but it's even looking up there, if you look up there in the wrong way, you're not going to see the claw shot switch that you can claw shot to. The camera's not really showing you where you're supposed to go next. You just have to look around and look up. But that's the most unintuitive part of the dungeon. For the most part, the dungeon is perfectly, it's better than the first two Wind Waker dungeons, at least. At least you're not constantly trudging through heavy snow all the time. The quicksand tries to do that, but if you keep attacking as a wolf over it, you'll be fine. Of course, the quicksand does have some annoying parts to it, sometimes there will be cockroaches running around in it, and sometimes you'll have spirit bugs that will grab onto you and look really creepy, and you'll only be able to get rid of them by turning on your senses and doing a spin attack. And you'll know when you're covered in them because Midna will freak out, because apparently she has sense vision all the time. Because that makes sense. Even though she's not a wolf, she apparently has sense vision. Okay. I can understand her being able to see things that are rendered invisible by the Twilight, and that's it. But why is she able to see Poes all the time and stuff? But yeah, the problem, when those things like the cockroaches climb onto you, you start moving really slowly, and that can get annoying in the quicksand. What's also annoying is the spikes that love to randomly come out of the ground. Well, not randomly, but they'll come out of set parts of the ground. But you have no way of knowing what parts of the ground have spikes under them. It's not immediately obvious looking at the ground where the spikes are. And at one point you're going to have to navigate through a spike maze, and it's basically the cactus maze from the 4th dungeon of Wind Waker all over again. Although it feels less annoying. I forget, does walking to the sides of the spikes hurt you? Because if it doesn't, then it's definitely not as annoying as the cactus maze. Because there's no reason that walking to a side of a spike should hurt you. But I think it did. It just feels like trial and error when you have no way of knowing where the spikes are going to show up, and you have to memorize it. It's also annoying how enemies can attack you when you're spending a really long time pulling on a chain to make a chandelier rise up, which is going to happen again, by the way. And these things can land on you and crush you, and restart you from the very beginning of the room. Thankfully, not from the very beginning of the dungeon. That would really suck. Like, it would really suck if it gave you a game over. It's not as amusing, and also not nearly as creepy getting crushed as it was in Wind Waker. Like, in Wind Waker, Link made a pretty weird voice clip when it got crushed, and the camera zoomed in so much onto Link's body that it kind of clipped into him or something, and it was really weird. And of course, like you'll also break like wooden bars with a sword, which I don't think you've done since the first dungeon in Wind Waker. So like they're just bringing it now. The Redeads are back, unfortunately. There is a very good way to deal with them, but you don't have the item for it yet, unfortunately. Which sucks because this is the dungeon with the most of them there. Planning? What's that? Obviously using the spin attack a whole bunch is a really good way to deal with when you have a huge army of these tiny skeleton things. They're kind of cute because they're just so short compared to you. Aren't they supposed to be the remains of actual humans? Why are they so short? Like, seriously, were all the prisoners that weren't imprisoned in Arbiter's grounds like way too short for their own good? But what I like to do with these things is, before I get the item that's good for dealing with them, just spin attack as much as you possibly can and jump attack, and hopefully your jump attack will reach them and interrupt them when they're hissing or whatever to make you get paralyzed annoyingly. It's a really good thing to have that central there, because otherwise how are you supposed to know that you can dig there at all? There's actually a glitch that allows you to keep your wooden sword. Because normally the wooden sword just completely disappears, like you have to give it to someone to progress. What you do to keep the wooden sword is that you pick up a large rock and carry it over to the locked gate in Orden, set it down on the far left of the gate, and do side jumps over the rock to land inside of the gate. Once inside the gate, try to angle Link so that his back is to the bridge, and repeatedly roll towards the lock in the center of the gate. This is kind of hard because the camera spazzes out. When Link hits the lock, he'll bounce backwards onto Orden's bridge. Now get to the caged monkey and kill one of the bokoblins with a slingshot. And then position Link so that him and the remaining bokoblin are on opposite sides of the cage. The other bokoblin can be pushed down to Trill, who will kill him if you want, but it's hard to do, and Trill likes to freeze the game and try to do that. Like, that's kind of weird. Even though you're at the very start of the game, going to the part of the game where, like, going to that part of Barren Woods at the very start of the game makes the game think that you're trying to rescue the caged monkey and Tallow anyways, really early on. Now after freeing the caged monkey, continue the game without a sword until Link gets the Orden sword and is back in the world outside the Twilight. Make sure to save, and also save it to a separate file as well. Picking up the wooden sword here will equip it, but the thing is that equipping a sword over it will make it disappear forever. So that's weird. The description didn't seem to go over how you actually skip giving it to Tallow. Like, I always found the wooden sword glitch to be very confusing. Why are you supposed to save to a separate file? And why, like, it still doesn't tell you, well, I guess if you skip the Tallow getting kidnapped thing entirely by saving him early in the game, maybe that completely skips him asking you to give him the wooden sword, because giving him the wooden sword is what triggers the him getting kidnapped scene in the first place. But if you've already technically saved him, then he's probably not going to ask for the wooden sword at all. So maybe that's how you do it. But unfortunately you can't Like, I'm assuming that you have to unequip the one sword at some point, because you need the Master Sword to defeat the final boss, obviously, and you need the Master Sword in the final dungeon, the penultimate dungeon of the game, because it has an ability that other swords don't.